I'm 41 years old, a biologist specializing in wildlife, and I've spent the last 15 years installing monitoring cameras in remote forests across the United States. I've recorded wolves, cougars, grizzly bears, moose, practically everything you can imagine. But in September 2024, one of my cameras captured something that simply shouldn't exist. Something that made me question everything I'd learned about North American wildlife. And the worst part? It took me 2 full months of investigation before I finally came face to face with the creature. This is the story of how my search for scientific answers led me to the most impossible encounter of my life. My name is Marcus Reed, and before I continue, if you enjoy stories about nature mysteries and unexplainable encounters, leave your like on this video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me continue bringing these narratives to you. Now, let's get to what matters. It all started on September 3rd, 2024. I was reviewing recordings from cameras I'd installed in the Cascade Mountains of northern Washington, an area known for its density of black bears and occasional grizzly bear sighting. My job was to monitor migratory patterns and predator behavior for a study funded by the state university. Nothing extraordinary, just basic field science. Camera number 7, positioned near a stream approximately 5 miles from the nearest road, had captured movement at 2:37 in the morning. When I opened the file on my laptop, I initially thought it was a large grizzly bear. The silhouette was enormous, moving between the trees in the camera's infrared vision. But then I paused the recording. The creature was standing upright, completely erect, walking on 2 legs with a fluidity that no bear can maintain for more than a few seconds. I zoomed in on the image. The quality wasn't perfect, but I could see that the arms were too long, disproportionate. The shoulders were broad, but the posture was vertical, like a human's, only much larger. My heart raced. First, I thought of a human in strange clothing, maybe an illegal hunter, but the height was completely wrong. Using the surrounding trees as reference, I calculated that the creature was between 6.9 and 7.9 feet tall, and the body mass seemed colossal, easily 600 pounds or more. I watched the recording about 20 times that night. The creature appeared for only 14 seconds, crossing the camera's field of view before disappearing into the forest darkness. There was no sound in the recording, just that impossible silhouette walking calmly between the trees. I knew what it looked like. I knew exactly what my brain was suggesting, but I was a scientist. I couldn't simply accept the most fantastic explanation. There had to be a rational answer. A bear in an unusual position, a camera perspective error, anything other than the obvious and impossible conclusion my mind was trying to reach. The next day, September 4th, I returned to the camera location. I brought measurement equipment, plaster casts for footprints, and a handheld camera. I arrived there around 10 in the morning after an exhausting hike along a poorly marked trail. The first sign appeared about 160 feet from the camera, broken branches at a height of approximately 6.5 feet from the ground. It wasn't conclusive. Bears also break branches, but the height was unusual. I continued searching, examining every inch of the ground. And then I found it, a partial footprint in the dried mud near the stream. It wasn't complete, just the impression of the front part of a foot, but it was large, very large. I placed my size 10 boot next to it for comparison. The footprint was at least 6 inches longer than my shoe. My breathing became irregular. Bears have large paw prints, but this was different. The shape was more elongated, less rounded at the front. It looked more like a giant human foot than a bear paw. I took 30 photos from different angles and tried to make a cast, but the earth was too dry to capture adequate details. I spent the rest of that day searching for more evidence. I found more broken branches, some scratches on tree bark that were too high for any animal I knew, and an area where the undergrowth had clearly been trampled by something heavy, but no complete footprint. No definitive proof. I returned home that night completely obsessed. I couldn't stop thinking about the recording, about the partial footprint, about the absolutely crazy possibility that I had found evidence of something that official science said didn't exist. During the following week, I installed 5 more cameras in a perimeter of about 2 miles around the original point. Better cameras with higher resolution and more sensitive motion detection capability. If that creature returned to the area, I would capture it on video with sufficient quality for proper analysis. I spent each night of that week reviewing scientific literature on unconfirmed sightings, historical reports of similar creatures in other parts of the world. I read studies about Gigantopithecus, an extinct primate that lived in Asia thousands of years ago. I read theories about remnant populations of unknown hominids. Everything seemed absurd, fantastical, but the evidence I had seen with my own eyes wouldn't let me rest. On September 11th, camera number 12 registered something. At 3:15 in the morning, movement at the edge of the frame. This time the quality was better, but the creature was farther away. Even so, I could see more details. The body was covered in dark fur. The head was large and rounded without the elongated snout of a bear. The arms swung naturally as it walked, exactly as a human walks. 15 seconds of recording, and then it disappeared again. I returned to the location the next day. This time I found more signs. An area where the vegetation had clearly been manipulated. Branches interwoven in a way that seemed almost intentional, as if someone had created a primitive type of shelter or marker. And nearby, another partial footprint, this time showing what appeared to be distinct toes. My scientific mind fought against what my eyes were seeing. Footprints like this could be faked. People make fake Bigfoot prints all the time. But who would do that here, more than 5 miles from any known trail, in an area that practically no one visits? And the recordings? How to explain those? I began taking detailed notes in a field journal. I recorded each discovery, each footprint, each broken branch. I drew maps of the area, marking points where I had found evidence. Patterns began to emerge. The creature seemed to have a preferred route, following the stream for about 1.25 miles before moving away to denser forest areas. On September 18th, something different happened. Camera number 7, the original one, captured a sound. The newer cameras had audio capability, and that early morning they recorded a vocalization that made me freeze when I first heard it. It was a low, guttural grunt, followed by something I can only describe as a modulated howl. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a wolf, it wasn't anything I recognized. I discreetly consulted colleagues at the university, sending only the audio without context. 2 bioacoustics experts told me they couldn't identify the species. One of them suggested it could be a bear vocalization distorted by the environment. The other admitted to being completely perplexed. He told me that the sound structure suggested complex vocal cords capable of sophisticated modulation. It wasn't simply an animal grunt. There was something almost linguistic in those sounds. I didn't mention my suspicions to anyone. Not yet. If I started talking about Bigfoot, my credibility as a scientist would be destroyed. I needed more evidence, irrefutable evidence. Throughout September and early October, I continued my investigation. I installed more cameras. I spent entire nights in the forest, hidden in an improvised shelter, waiting, watching, listening. I saw bears, I saw deer, I saw coyotes, but I didn't see the creature. The cameras, however, kept recording. On September 25th, clear footprints in fresh mud after a rain, 5 distinct toes, a foot approximately 16 inches long. I made perfect casts this time. The plaster captured every detail, the skin lines, the curvature of the toes, even what appeared to be nail impressions at the tips. When I analyzed the casts at home, I was impressed with the similarity to human feet. The anatomy was almost identical, just magnified. The arch was present, the toes were articulated similarly to ours, but there were subtle differences. The toes were proportionally longer. The width of the foot suggested an extremely stable base, perfect for carrying a large body weight. On October 2nd, more vocalizations, this time seeming like a conversation between 2 individuals, sounds being exchanged through the forest. I recorded everything. I spent hours analyzing the frequencies, the patterns. There was rhythm there. There was something that seemed like intentional communication. One sound would be emitted, followed by silence, and then a response coming from a different direction, at least a third of a mile away. I began to wonder if there was a family living there, multiple individuals sharing territory. The idea was both exciting and terrifying. If there were several, the chances of an encounter increased, but it also meant there was a population, not just an isolated individual. On October 7th, camera number 15 captured something extraordinary. The creature passed directly in front of the camera, only about 13 feet away. The recording lasted 8 seconds, but it was the clearest 8 seconds I had. I could see the face, heavy, with a prominent forehead, deep-set eyes, flattened nose. The body was muscular, covered in dark brown fur that glistened slightly with the moisture from the night fog. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a human in a costume. It was something completely different, something that shouldn't be there, but was. I sat on the floor of my living room, watching that recording for the 30th time, and finally accepted what I was seeing. There was something living in those mountains, something large, intelligent, elusive, something that generations of witnesses had reported, but that science refused to acknowledge. And I needed to see it in person. I began preparing for a longer expedition. I bought high-quality camping equipment, more sophisticated recording systems, even a thermal camera that could detect heat signatures through dense vegetation. I spent almost $3,000 on equipment, money I really couldn't waste, but the obsession had taken hold of me. My wife, Sarah, was worried. She noticed that I barely slept, that I spent all my free time studying topographic maps, planning routes through the forest. I told her it was just intense work for the university project. She didn't completely believe it, but she knew me well enough to know when it was pointless to argue. On October 14th, I began a more serious expedition. I brought equipment to camp for several days, more cameras, audio recording devices, night vision binoculars. I established a base camp about 3 miles from the area where the cameras had captured the most activity. I chose a strategic location, protected by a rock formation that blocked the wind and offered a view of a small clearing. I set up my tent discreetly, using natural colors that blended with the vegetation. I created a system of false trails around the camp, small detours that would allow me to detect if something approached. The first 3 days were frustrating. I saw a lot of normal wildlife, but nothing extraordinary. At night, I heard sounds from the forest, wind, nocturnal animals, the distant stream, but nothing that indicated the creature's presence. During the day, I systematically explored the area, always leaving GPS markers so I wouldn't get lost. I found more old evidence, footprints partially erased by rain, broken branches that were already dry, but nothing fresh, nothing that suggested recent activity. I began to doubt. Maybe the creature had moved to another area. Maybe the presence of the cameras had scared it away. Maybe I was wasting my time chasing shadows. On the 4th night, October 18th, everything changed. I was at my camp around 11 at night when I heard branches breaking in the forest, maybe 330 feet away. It wasn't the sound of a small animal. It was heavy, deliberate. I grabbed my flashlight and night vision binoculars, but didn't move. I stayed completely still, just listening. The sounds approached. More branches breaking, the noise of something large moving between the trees, and then a smell, strong, musky, like a mixture of sweat, damp earth, and something animal that I couldn't identify. It was intense enough to make me wrinkle my nose. It wasn't the acrid smell of a bear, nor the wet dog odor of a wolf. It was unique, pungent, impossible to ignore. I turned on the night vision binoculars and scanned the forest, green shadows dancing between the trees, and then I saw it, a massive silhouette about 200 feet away, moving slowly between the trunks. It was too large to be a bear, and it was completely upright. My heart was beating so hard I thought it would explode. I kept watching, barely breathing, as the creature moved through the forest. It seemed to be looking for something, occasionally stopping to examine the ground or touch bushes. The movements were deliberate, intelligent. There was nothing bestial or careless about those gestures. After maybe 10 minutes it moved away, disappearing into the darkness. I couldn't sleep that night. I sat, alert, waiting for it to return. But it didn't return. The next day, I found fresh footprints only 130 feet from my camp. Clear, deep footprints, showing all 5 toes and details of the sole. I made plaster casts of 3 of them, photographed extensively, and measured everything. The largest was 16 inches long and 7 inches wide. The depth of the impression suggested a weight of at least 660 pounds. I also found feces, large feces, full of seeds, nutshells, and some small rodent bones. I collected a sample for later analysis, using gloves and a sterilized plastic bag. The composition suggested an omnivorous diet, similar to bears, but the shape and size were different. I was close, very close. The creature was in the area, using the same trails, the same locations. It was just a matter of time until a direct encounter. I spent that day repositioning cameras, creating a denser surveillance network around my camp. If the creature returned, I would capture it from multiple angles. I also prepared a handheld camera with a tripod, ready to be activated at any moment. On October 23rd, it almost happened. I was checking one of the remote cameras when I heard a sound behind me, a low grunt, almost a growl. I turned quickly and saw, maybe 80 feet away, partially hidden behind a thick tree, an enormous figure watching me. Our eyes met. Even at that distance, even through the vegetation, I could see the eyes. Dark, deep, incredibly human in their expression. There was intelligence there, recognition, and caution. I was completely paralyzed, not from fear, but from pure astonishment. There it was, real, solid, impossible. The creature stood watching me for maybe 20 seconds, which seemed like an eternity. Then, without any additional sound, it simply retreated into the forest and disappeared. My hands were shaking. I tried to grab my camera, but by the time I managed, it was already gone. I got no photo, I got no video, just the memory of those eyes watching me through the trees. That encounter changed something in me. It was no longer just scientific curiosity. There was a connection, however brief. That creature saw me, evaluated me, and decided to leave me alone. There was no aggression, there was no threat, just mutual observation, and then retreat. I spent the next few days practically living in the forest. I slept little. I ate even less. I was consumed by the need for another encounter, for better evidence, for irrefutable proof. The cameras continued recording, more footprints, more sounds. On October 28th, a camera captured the creature carrying what appeared to be a large branch, walking upright with ease while transporting a weight that would make a human stumble. On October 31st, Halloween, ironically, I had my closest encounter. It was late afternoon, the sun setting behind the mountains, casting long shadows through the forest. I was near a small natural meadow, a location where the cameras had shown frequent activity. I sat against a tree, trying to stay as quiet as possible. I had a camera ready, configured to start recording at the slightest movement, and I waited. Twilight deepened. The forest became quieter, that strange silence that happens between day and night, when diurnal animals retreat and nocturnal ones haven't yet emerged. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, measured, heavy, coming from my left, moving toward the meadow. I turned on the camera, keeping it low, barely daring to breathe. The footsteps got closer, and then it emerged from the tree line. The creature entered the meadow with surprising grace for its size. In the faint twilight, I could see details that the night cameras didn't capture. The fur was dark brown, longer on the shoulders and arms, shorter on the face and hands. Muscles moved under the skin and fur as it walked. The height was impressive, easily 7.5 feet, maybe more. It stopped in the center of the meadow and began searching for something on the ground. Roots, I realized. It was digging up roots with its hands, enormous hands with surprisingly agile fingers. It ate some, discarded others. The movements were methodical, experienced. It knew exactly what it was looking for. I kept filming, barely believing what I was seeing. 3 minutes, 4. The creature continued its calm search for food, apparently unaware of my presence. I could see every detail, the way its fingers manipulated the plants, the concentrated expression on its face as it examined each root before deciding whether to eat or discard it. Then the wind changed. It blew from my side toward it. The creature stopped immediately. Its head rose, The entire body became tense, alert, and slowly, very slowly, it turned in my direction. Our eyes met again. This time at only 50 feet away, this time in sufficient light to see every detail of that impossible face, the heavy forehead, the wide nostrils that flared as it smelled me, the eyes, my God, the eyes that studied me with an intensity that made my spine chill. It wasn't an animal looking at me, it was someone. There was thought behind those eyes, evaluation, decision. I could almost see the thoughts forming. Who is this intruder? Is it a threat? Should I attack or retreat? We stayed like that, locked in a silent standoff, for maybe 30 seconds. My camera kept recording, capturing everything. The creature made no sound, made no aggressive movement. It just watched me with that disturbing intelligence. Then, as suddenly as it had stopped, it turned and walked back into the forest. It didn't run, it showed no panic. It simply decided the interaction was over and left, disappearing between the trees with surprising speed for something so large. I sat there trembling for another 20 minutes. When I finally stood up, my legs barely supported me, but I had the recording. Finally, I had a clear, sharp recording in good light. I returned to camp that night in a state of shock. I watched the video countless times. It was 4 minutes and 47 seconds of the clearest Bigfoot evidence ever recorded, at least the clearest I had ever seen. But then reality hit me. What would I do with this? If I made it public, I would be ridiculed, called a hoaxer. My career would be over. But if I kept it to myself, what was the point? The creature existed. I proved it to myself. But so what? I spent the first days of November struggling with this question. The recording was too good to ignore, but also too good not to raise suspicions of manipulation. The world was full of fake videos, digitally edited to look real. How would I convince anyone that this was genuine? I showed the recording to a single, trusted colleague, an anthropology professor who had always been open-minded. He was silent for a long time after watching. "Marcus," he finally said, "either this is the most perfect hoax I've ever seen, or you just proved that an unknown primate species lives in our forests. And honestly, I don't know which of these options is more frightening." "It's not a hoax," I said. "I know you believe that, but the world will want more than your word. They'll want DNA. They'll want a body. They'll want proof you can't provide without capturing or harming the creature." He was right, and I knew I would never do that. Not after looking into those eyes, not after seeing the intelligence, the personality, the conscious life that was there. We talked for hours about the implications. If this creature existed, there were probably others, an entire population living hidden in the vast forests of the Northwest. How did they survive without being detected? How did they maintain viable population numbers without being discovered? My colleague suggested that perhaps there were only small remnant groups, fragmented populations struggling to survive in increasingly reduced habitat. This would explain why sightings were rare and why we had never found mortal remains. A species on the brink of extinction would be extremely cautious, extremely evasive. The idea saddened me deeply. If there was a population, it was clearly in danger. Human expansion, deforestation, climate change, all of this would threaten their survival. And if I revealed their existence, what would happen? Hunters would invade the forests. Tourists would disturb their habitat. Scientists would try to capture them for study. So I made a decision. I removed all my cameras, I stored the recordings in a safe place, and I left the creature in peace. It had lived in that forest probably its entire life, hidden, surviving, avoiding the human world. Who was I to change that? But I couldn't simply forget. In the following weeks I returned to the area several times, always alone, always discreet. I didn't install more cameras. I didn't try to record more evidence. I just observed respectfully, keeping my distance. I saw signs of its presence, fresh footprints after rains, branches arranged in peculiar ways, occasionally that unmistakable smell floating in the morning breeze. It was still there, still living its secret life among the trees. In mid-November, I found something that made me stop. It was a small pile of stones, carefully stacked in a formation that clearly wasn't natural. Around it, the bark of several trees had been scratched in patterns that almost seemed deliberate. territorial markers. Primitive art, communication. I took photos, but didn't disturb anything. I just documented and moved away. If the creature was trying to communicate something to me, I would respect that by keeping my distance. Today, November 27th, 2024, I still think about that creature. I still wonder if it's still there, moving silently between the trees, living a life that the world refuses to acknowledge. I have the recordings. I have the photos of the footprints. I have the plaster casts stored in boxes in my basement. But more importantly, I have the memory of those eyes watching me across the meadow, a momentary connection between two worlds that should never meet. And that, to me, is more valuable than any scientific proof. Sometimes, when life gets too complicated, when the pressures of the modern world become suffocating, I return to that forest. Not to look for the creature, not to collect more evidence, just to be there, in that space where something extraordinary still exists, hidden from civilization, living according to laws older than ours. Sarah knows now. I told her everything. I showed her the recordings. She was silent for a long time, processing, and then hugged me. She understood why I had to keep the secret, why revealing the truth would condemn that creature. My scientific career continues. I still install monitoring cameras. I still study wildlife, but now I do it with a different perspective. I know there are mysteries out there that are perhaps better left unsolved, wonders that should remain wondrous precisely because we don't dissect, catalogue, and explain them, because some things don't need to be proven to be real. Some things should remain mysteries, protected from the relentless light of human scrutiny, and maybe, just maybe, it's better that way. The forest keeps its secret, and I'll keep hers, because in the end, it's not about proving these creatures exist. It's about protecting what remains wild in this world. It's about recognizing that not everything needs to be known, captured, studied. It's about leaving some doors closed, some paths untraveled, some mysteries intact, because the world needs places where the impossible can still exist. And I had the rare privilege of finding one of those places.